Basically, the story of the spine starts many millions of years ago, and this is a typical ammonite fossil that shows the segmental parts that would later become the developmental spine of the body. So as we came from the water, which was a very different medium, we didn't need a vertical strength, and even when we were quadrupeds we didn't need a vertical strength to the spine, because that was quite a strong structure for a body. But as we become upright, and the human being is the only really efficient bipedal animal. Orangutans can be quite bipedal in the trees, and chimpanzees for a very short while, but because they haven't got the other adaptations that also helped to develop when we developed the spine, they're not very bipedally efficient. But for us to be bipedally efficient, we have essentially three curves in the spine: one in the cervical area of the neck, one in the dorsal area, which is the mid-spine, and one in the lumbar area. And the sacrum, the angle of the sacrum in between the two iliac bones is very critical in giving a vertiginous or an upright competent strength to the whole spine. So as we evolved from that ammonite fossil to an upright spine, this is now what we're trying to keep. When we look at the upright stability of the body, its postural set is maintained by the bilateral or antagonistic or reciprocal pull of the muscles, both left to right, front to back, so that in 3 dimensions we can move around. And this is the commonest concept of how we move around. Anatomically, it's accepted muscles move bones, and that the body is basically a weight-bearing structure. However, the work of Stephen Levin, a surgeon who gave up surgery over 25 years ago to put forward his concept of Biotensegrity, which was a concept that had first been brought about by a man called Buckminster Fuller, who brought into architecture a totally different concept of tension across integrity on how to build buildings and how buildings basically stay up. And even an example of this 2,000 years ago was the Pantheon, which the Romans built and put basically a concrete roof over a building the size of a football field with a hole in the top. And this was the first example of tension across integrity. Even though Stephen Levin lectured for many years on this concept, it wasn't really took up too quickly as a concept that the body was a suspensory mechanism rather than a weight-bearing mechanism. But my mentor in Japan, Dr. Hatsumi, talked about floating in your walk when he was using his Budo martial methods. And he would just appear to almost move effortlessly across the floor and also pin people down with basically one finger holding the whole of the body. This confused many of us as we watched him work and tried to replicate his techniques and into the effortless scenario that he was presenting. I'd come from a karate background that I'd spent 15 years from the age of 25 to 35, and when I first met Dr. Hatsumi, he was doing a seminar here in 1986 after I'd trained in his art for a year. When I saw a man of 55 moving around and floating in space, I realised that that was the way I wanted to move, and immediately changed from karate to this new method. I studied this method for many years before presenting some of the findings that I was doing in my work. I looked at the way he worked and his body movement, which is known as tajuts. I started to apply it to the techniques that I was using by not manipulating the person's body, but still not understanding tensegrity at this time. When I presented these findings to him, he decided to take me on as a student with 2 other Westerners, and for the first time broke a protocol of teaching the medicine inside of his martial system, and granted us a Menkyo Kadan teaching certificate in 1995, and taught us from those years onwards. And that's basically where the Amatsu came from. It was all written down in the ancient scrolls of Amatsu Hibun, which collectively had all sorts of ancient information about Japan, about astrology, about ecology, about methodology, about language, and medicine was a very big part of this. And that's hence where the name come from, Amatsu, from those scrolls. But basically what he was teaching us was the Anma, which is push-pull, and the Seitai, which is body correction, and the Sakotsu of those levels, which is basically like the osteopathy of Japanese art. So to understand the way he moved, we had to soften up, we had to move in a more integrated way. This involved proprioception, coordination, and movement skills. Then about 15 years ago, I met with Dr. Levin, and we invited him to give us a talk on tension integrity. And this is an open frame icosahedron. And these models, made by Tom Fleming in Canada, who's now retired, was originally a toy maker, and then he started to make these tension integrity models. And the tension integrity models show that you have a floating suspension, and any movement on one part of the model makes the whole of that model move globally. He started to make many models. This is an example of a pelvis. So that as the pelvis would move in walking, then you would get the pitch and the roll and the yaw actions of the pelvis, so that the models would actually work as anatomically perfect as the body demonstrates its anatomy as it moves. And the whole concept of Tensegrity is that it's tension integrity, it's a closed model, it's non-gravitational, and it's a floating suspension model. This was quite contrary to the weight-bearing structural set that everyone was working with anatomically. And for me, it didn't fit anymore to adjust a vertebra in isolation, or to work with one body part in isolation, because everything works globally. In a tensegral model, you can't adjust one part without affecting the whole. The concept of the whole limb, such as an arm, being a tensegral unit built of these triangular struts, and the whole body being strutted in a triangular formation, is shown in this model. As I pull the strings, what happens is the model starts to change shape and become vertically efficient. And then as you loosen the strings, it goes back to its normal shape. And this is the way that Tom Fleming and Stephen Levin are purporting that the limbs actually move rather than the muscles. The muscles stabilise the joints and the joints move, but they actually use an integral movement of the whole system across the borders, applying no stress to any one particular part at any one time. And this is Tom Fleming's model of the spine. I was very fortunate to acquire this model from him. He was reluctant to sell it at the time because he'd only made one. But a little bit of persuasion, and I showed him my needs, and he willingly let it go. And if you squeeze any part of the model, if I squeeze down in the sacrum, then up here where my finger is between the atlas and the axis, which would represent the top of the head, it actually nips the fingers. It's so well made. And that shows that any one part of the spine that we misaligns the whole, which again takes me away from the fact that you can have one vertebra out of alignment and not affect the whole of the body. So in Amatsu, we always align the pelvis to the feet and the head-on neck reflexes and the whole postural alignment set of those muscles to bring the body into a vertical competence, so that the person can then return to sports or daily life and get rid of the many symptoms that arise from misalignments in the body. So that's Tensegrity and how we utilise it in Amatsu, along with muscle testing and other orthopaedic checks.